The night was cold, the air thick with the smell of wet asphalt and the distant hum of city traffic. Officer Michael Carter was on his routine patrol, his mind heavy with the weight of another failed day. The bitterness of his life seemed to cling to him, just like the grime on the streets he walked every night. He had never been one to think about the people he passed, just faces in the crowd, invisible souls lost in their own battles. He turned a corner, his flashlight cutting through the darkness. His eyes scanned the empty alleyway ahead. A figure stood motionless against the graffiti-covered wall, hunched and small. Carter's gaze narrowed. Another kid, probably homeless, probably desperate. It wasn't the first time he'd encountered someone in this state, but it was the first time he felt the sting of irritation. The boy was filthy, his clothes torn and worn. His face was hidden by his messy hair, but Carter could see the outline of his fragile frame, barely standing. The boy didn't react to his presence, didn't even acknowledge the officer's approach. Carter approached him without a second thought, his boots echoing on the concrete. "What's your name?" Carter asked gruffly, his tone cold. The boy didn't respond. "Did you hear me?" Carter repeated, his patience wearing thin. Without waiting for an answer, he grabbed the boy by the collar and jerked him upright. The boy winced in pain, but didn't fight back, his eyes wide with fear. "What are you doing here, huh?" Carter demanded, his grip tightening. The boy still didn't speak. Carter's frustration grew, and without warning, he kicked the boy hard in the ribs. The impact sent the boy sprawling to the ground with a cry of pain. "Get up," Carter shouted, his voice seething with anger. The boy curled into a ball, gasping for breath, barely able to move. But Carter wasn't done. He kicked him again, harder this time, the sound of his boot meeting flesh ringing out in the empty alley. As the boy's body crumpled further into the cold pavement, Carter stood over it, panting. His anger still simmered, but something else, something deep inside him, gnawed at his conscience. But it was quickly buried beneath layers of indifference. He turned to leave, not giving the boy another thought. But as he walked away, he felt an odd tug in his chest, a moment of hesitation, a sense of something incomplete. It didn't last long, though, and he pushed it aside. The boy lay motionless in the alley, his body battered and broken, but his mind was elsewhere. The next morning arrived like any other, with the harsh city light seeping through the blinds of Officer Michael Carter's small, dimly lit apartment. He was tired, physically drained, and his mind felt as though it was teetering on the edge of exhaustion. He didn't care to acknowledge the growing emptiness inside him. He had learned long ago to ignore it, to bottle up the emotions that threatened to overwhelm him. His shift had been uneventful. Aside from the brutal encounter the night before, the image of the boy he had kicked still lingered in his mind. Carter had dismissed it as just another unfortunate casualty of life on the streets. He'd seen it all before: the homeless, the addicts, the lost ones who didn't care to pull themselves out of the gutter. They were all the same to him. But as the hours passed, the image of that boy, the way he cowered, the way he didn't fight back, haunted him. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that something had been left unresolved. Later that afternoon, Carter's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at the screen, but the name of the caller made his blood run cold. "Mom," he muttered under his breath. He hadn't heard from her in years, not since that day when everything had fallen apart. Slowly, reluctantly, he answered. "Mike." His mother's voice was soft, tentative. She sounded as though she had aged years in a short time. I have something to tell you." Carter sat back in his chair, his heart racing. "What is it, Mom?" There was a pause on the other end, a long silence that only deepened his anxiety. "It's about your son," she finally said, her voice faltering. His blood ran cold. He felt the weight of those words like a punch to the gut. "What did you say?" His voice was barely a whisper. "Your son," she repeated, the words heavier now. "You have a son, Michael, and he's been living on the streets." The world seemed to stop. Carter's mind raced. A son? He hadn't known. He hadn't even suspected. The memory of the boy from last night flashed in his mind, the boy he had kicked, the boy he had hurt. His stomach turned, and a wave of nausea washed over him. "Where is he?" Carter asked, his voice shaking. His hands gripped the phone tightly, the reality of the situation slowly sinking in. "I don't know," his mother said, her voice broken. "But he's out there, Michael. He's out there, and he's your son, The connection went silent, and for a moment, Carter couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The walls of his small apartment seemed to close in on him. He couldn't believe it. He couldn't process the words. His son, the boy he had kicked, the boy he had abandoned, his flesh and blood. The truth hit him like a freight train. The boy he had hurt, the one he'd thought was just another street kid, was his own child. A child he had abandoned long ago, forgotten in the mess of his life. Carter hung up the phone, his hands trembling. The weight of his actions bore down on him like a physical force. He had crossed a line that he couldn't take back. And now, the boy was out there, suffering, alone. But Carter's thoughts began to race. He had a chance to fix this, to make it right. The air in the city felt heavy as Officer Michael Carter walked through the same streets he had patrolled countless times. But today was different. Today, he wasn't just another officer on duty. He was a man on a mission to find the child he had abandoned, the boy he had brutalized without knowing who he was. Every step he took felt like it was pulling him deeper into the weight of his past, a past he had tried so hard to bury. His mind raced with questions. How had he not known? How had he gone all these years without a single thought of the boy he had left behind? The images from last night, the boy on the ground, his face bruised and contorted in pain, haunted him. It wasn't just the boy he had hurt. It was the realization that he had discarded his own flesh and blood like trash. Carter couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking toward some sort of reckoning. The truth was closing in, and it wasn't going to let him off easy. He didn't know where to start. The streets were filled with lost souls, all trying to survive the cruel world that had turned its back on them. But there had to be a way. He had to find his son. His eyes scanned the street corners, the alleyways, the dark corners where the homeless gathered. He passed by people sitting against buildings, their eyes hollow and distant. Each one could be the boy, could be his son. The thought made his chest tighten, the guilt crushing him. He stopped at a small cafe on the corner, one that he used to frequent during his breaks. The woman behind the counter, a familiar face from his past, looked up at him as he entered. She greeted him with a hesitant smile, but it faltered when she saw the look on his face. "Mike, what's going on? You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "I'm looking for someone," Carter said, his voice heavy. "A kid. He's been on the streets. He's my son." The woman's eyes widened in shock, but she quickly masked it. She didn't ask any more questions, just nodded and leaned in closer. "I don't know much, but I've seen a kid like that around, always hanging out by the old church, the one near 4th. You might want to try there." Carter didn't waste another second. He thanked her quickly and left the cafe, his mind set on the church. His heart pounded in his chest as he walked toward the old building. The streets seemed darker now, the shadows more menacing. He could feel the weight of the city pressing down on him, suffocating him. As he neared the church, he saw him, the boy from the night before. He was sitting on the steps, his back hunched and his eyes vacant, staring at the ground. His clothes were filthy, his hair tangled and matted. He looked so small, so fragile. The sight of him made Carter's heart break all over again. This was the child he had abandoned, the child he had hurt. For a moment, Carter stood there, just watching him. The boy didn't notice him, lost in his own world of pain and loneliness. Carter's mind screamed at him to do something, to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, he took a step forward, and the boy's head jerked up, his eyes wide with surprise and fear. The moment their gazes locked, something shifted inside. Carter. The boy's eyes, the same green as his own, burned with a pain that Carter could never have imagined. "Hey," Carter said softly, his voice trembling. I'm here. I'm sorry." The boy didn't respond. He just stared at Carter, like he didn't believe what he was hearing. Carter knelt down, trying to get on the boy's level. "I know I can't fix everything. I can't change what I did, but I want to try. Please, let me try." For a long moment, there was no movement, no words. Then the boy's lips parted, and in a small, broken voice, he whispered, "Why?" Carter swallowed hard, his throat tight. He had no answer, not one that would be enough to make up for what he had done. I don't know, but I'm sorry." The boy looked at him, his eyes searching Carter's face for something in answer, a sign of truth. And for the first time, Carter wondered if this was the moment that would change everything. If this was the beginning of his redemption, or if it was too late to make amends. The boy remained silent, his gaze fixed on Carter, as if waiting for something more, something beyond words. The weight of the situation hung in the air between them, an uncomfortable silence that stretched on. Carter could feel his heart pounding, the anxiety growing within him, but he knew that words alone wouldn't undo the damage he had caused. "I've been searching for you," Carter said after what felt like an eternity. I didn't know it was you." The boy's lips curled into a bitter, hollow smile. "You didn't know? You didn't know the boy you left behind?" His voice cracked as he spoke, the words filled with an anguish Carter had never allowed himself to acknowledge. Carter felt a sting in his chest, a searing pain of guilt. He had never been able to look at his own reflection in the mirror and see the mistakes he had made. But now, with the boy's eyes on him, he couldn't escape the truth. He had failed him. He had failed them both. I couldn't protect you," Carter admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I couldn't even protect myself. I left you alone. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I want to make things right. I want to try." The boy turned his head slightly, his eyes narrowing as if he was weighing every word that Carter said. His expression softened for just a moment, but the walls around him stayed firmly in place. "Do you think that's enough?" the boy muttered. "After all these years, after everything I've been through, do you think trying will fix it?" Carter felt his throat tighten. He didn't know how to fix it. He didn't even know where to begin. But the truth was there. He was face to face with the son he had abandoned, and there was no escaping the hurt he had caused. "I don't know how to fix it," Carter said, his voice breaking. "But I know I can't undo the past. I know I can't take away the pain, but I can be here now. I can help you. Please, let me help you." The boy looked away, wiping at his face though. Carter couldn't tell if it was too high tears or just the exhaustion of carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. His body, so small and fragile, trembled slightly, and Carter could see the layers of years spent fighting for survival reflected in his every movement. "You don't get it," the boy whispered, shaking his head. "I don't know who you are anymore. How can I trust you? How can I trust anyone?" Carter opened his mouth to speak, but the words got stuck. Trust, that was the thing, wasn't it? How could anyone trust a man who had turned his back on his own child? How could a father, who should have been a protector, ever hope to rebuild the connection that had been severed so long ago? "I'm not asking for your trust right now," Carter said quietly. "I'm asking for a chance to make up for the years I lost, for the things I did to you. I won't stop trying, even if you don't want me to." The boy was silent for a long time, his face unreadable, his thoughts hidden behind a wall of pain and distrust. Finally, he let out a heavy sigh, a sound so worn and tired it made Carter's heart. "Why should I believe you?" the boy asked, his voice barely audible. "Why should I believe anything you say?" "I don't have an answer for you," Carter said, standing up slowly. He looked down at the boy, his heart heavy. "But I'm here. That's the only thing I can offer right now. I'll be here, no matter what." For a brief moment, the boy looked at him again, his eyes softer, but still filled with skepticism. He stood up slowly, his legs weak from the cold, from hunger, from everything he had endured. "You can't undo what's been done," the boy said, turning away. "But I'm not going to let you walk away thinking that you've earned anything from me." Carter's heart sank, but he didn't argue. Instead, he nodded. "I don't expect anything from you. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, but I am asking for a chance to do better, one step at a time. That's all I can offer." The boy walked toward the church doors, hesitating for a moment before glancing back over his shoulder. "I'll be here tomorrow night. If you're still looking, you know where to find me." Carter stood in the middle of the alley, watching the boy disappear into the shadows, unsure of what to expect next, but knowing one thing for sure: the journey had just begun. The next day, Carter stood outside the church, his breath visible in the cold morning air. His uniform felt heavier than usual, the weight of guilt pressing down on his shoulders. He had no idea what he was supposed to do next, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the boy, the son he had abandoned, was out there, waiting for him. He had promised to be there, but now that the moment had come, He wasn't sure if he was ready. He wasn't sure if he had the strength to face the boy again. But what choice did he have? The boy had given him a chance, a small one, and Carter wasn't about to throw it away. As the minutes ticked by, Carter's thoughts raced. What did he have to offer? A few words? Empty promises? Or was he truly capable of changing? Would the boy ever trust him after everything he had done? Carter didn't have the answers, but he knew he couldn't back down. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling slightly as he looked at the message. It was from his mother. "I heard from the shelter. They said he's been showing up there a lot recently. He's alive, Michael. He's not giving up." Carter read the message over and over, the words settling in his chest like a weight. Alive. His son was still alive. After all these years, after everything he had done, the boy was still out there fighting to survive. And now Carter had to find him. With renewed determination, Carter turned and made his way back to the church. He knew it wasn't going to be easy. He knew that the boy wasn't just going to forgive him overnight, but the boy had shown him a sliver of hope, and Carter couldn't let that slip away. When he arrived at the church, the streets were quieter than the day before, the light of the setting sun casting long shadows along the buildings. He approached the steps cautiously, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of the boy. There, sitting on the steps once more, was the boy. His posture was the same, hunched and small, his clothes still ragged, his face a mask of exhaustion and pain. But there was something different in his eyes this time. They weren't as guarded, as distant. There was a flicker of something else, something Carter hadn't seen the night before. "I came," Carter said, his voice steady, but his heart racing. "I know I don't deserve it, but I came." The boy didn't look up at first, but after a long pause, he finally met Carter's gaze. There was no anger, no hostility in his eyes, only the raw vulnerability of a child who had been abandoned and betrayed. "You came," the boy repeated softly, his voice heavy with something Carter couldn't place. "But can you stay?" Carter swallowed hard. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "But I'm here, and I'm not leaving. Not again." The boy stared at him for a long time, as though searching for any sign that Carter was truly sincere. Then, without a word, he stood up, his legs shaky but determined. He looked up at the sky, then back at Carter. "You're not gonna fix everything. Not overnight," the boy said, his tone still guarded, but not as harsh. "But you can try, and maybe I'll let you." Carter nodded, a sense of relief washing over it. The boy was still angry, still hurt, but he hadn't given up entirely. That was more than Carter had expected. "I'll try," Carter said, his voice firm with conviction. "I'll try every day." The boy gave a small, almost imperceptible nod before turning away and walking down the steps. Carter followed him, unsure of what came next, but knowing that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long, but for the first time, Carter believed that maybe, just maybe, there was a chance for redemption, a chance to be the father he should have been all along. As they walked through the quiet streets, side by side, Carter couldn't help but feel a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, it was enough. The days that followed felt like a blur of uncertainty. Officer Michael Carter tried his best to keep his distance, to avoid pushing the boy too hard. But he couldn't help but feel that every moment he spent with him was both a second chance and a painful reminder of everything he had done wrong. They met every evening by the church, the boy sitting on the same worn steps. Sometimes Carter brought him food, a small gesture, but one that meant more than he could express. The boy took it without much gratitude, but Carter could see the slight softening in his demeanor each time. Carter had learned that the boy Lucas, as he had introduced himself, didn't trust easily. He had lived a life that had hardened him, a life of neglect and survival on the unforgiving streets. Carter had expected anger, and he found it. But he also found something else. Fear. Fear of being abandoned again. Fear of trusting someone who had already let him down once. That night, after handing Lucas a warm sandwich, Carter sat beside him on the steps. The air was crisp, but neither of them spoke about it. There was a distance between them, an unspoken tension that neither of them knew how to bridge. They sat quietly, both of them lost in their own thoughts. You said you were looking for me, Lucas said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was barely above a whisper, his eyes focused on the street ahead, not daring to meet Carter's. I am, Carter replied, unsure how to continue. He could feel the weight of Lucas's words, the fear in them. The boy wanted to know why he was here, why Carter was still trying. But Carter wasn't sure how to explain it. How could he possibly explain why he, a man who had turned his back on his own son, was now trying to be the father he should have been years ago? You don't know what it's like, Lucas continued, his voice shaky now, to have someone promise you they'll be there, and then just leave. I was just a kid, you know, just a kid, and you didn't come back. You didn't come for me. You didn't care. Carter's throat tightened, and he felt his stomach churn. The words were like knives, and they cut deep. Every one of them felt deserved. He had abandoned his own flesh and blood, left him to fend for himself. I'm sorry, Lucas, Carter whispered, his voice breaking. I'm sorry for what I did. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. Lucas didn't say anything for a long time. He just sat there, staring at the ground, his hands trembling slightly. Carter wanted to reach out, to comfort him, but he knew it was too soon. The boy had been through too much to trust someone like him again. You think you can just show up and make everything okay? Lucas asked, his voice barely audible. You can't. You can't undo what's been done. I don't think I can make everything okay, Carter said, shaking his head. I can't undo the past. I can't change what happened, but I can be here now. That's all I can offer. Lucas looked at him then, his expression still guarded, but there was a flicker of something else, something softer, something that told Carter he hadn't lost him completely. Not yet. After a long pause, Lucas sighed deeply and leaned back against the church steps. I don't know if I can forgive you, he said, his voice tired, but I don't know if I can keep pushing you away either. Carter felt a weight lift from his chest, but it was only temporary. He knew the road ahead was long and uncertain, and that it would take more than a few kind words to make up for the years he had lost. He had no illusion that everything would be fixed overnight. I'm not asking for your forgiveness, Carter replied quietly. I'm just asking for a chance to try, to do better, to be here when you need me. Lucas didn't respond, but Carter didn't need him to. The boy's eyes, though still filled with doubt, had softened ever so slightly. That was enough for now. As the night grew colder, they sat in silence, the sounds of the city drifting around them. Carter felt a glimmer of hope, but he knew it was fragile, like the first light of dawn on a dark, long night. He would have to prove himself, not just through words, but through every action, every step he took from here on out. And though he didn't know what the future held, he was willing to try. For the boy, for the son he had abandoned. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The days grew shorter, the evenings colder, and still Carter met Lucas at the church every night. The boy's defenses were starting to crack, but they were slow, deliberate cracks, like the faintest hairline, fractures in a wall built over years of pain. Carter could feel it, but he wasn't pushing anymore. He had learned that patience was the only thing that would allow this fragile relationship to breathe. Lucas had stopped looking at him with distrust every time Carter showed up, though there were still long, silent moments when the boy wouldn't speak. Sometimes Carter would bring him food, or sometimes just sit in silence, the sounds of the city flowing past them. Slowly, Lucas started to share more small, cautious words about his life, about the struggles of being a child lost in the streets. But it wasn't enough, not yet. One night, as they sat together on the church steps, Carter could tell something was different. The air was thick, the tension palpable. Lucas didn't usually talk much about his past, but tonight, something was stirring inside him, something Carter couldn't ignore. I don't know if I can ever trust anyone, Lucas said suddenly, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost to himself, but Carter heard every word. I don't know if I can trust you. Carter's heart sank, but he held himself steady. He knew he had no right to expect the boy to trust him. He had abandoned him. He had left him to fight for survival on his own, and now he was asking for the very thing that he had failed to give. I understand, Carter said quietly, his voice soft. I don't expect you to trust me right away, Lucas. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. I'll prove it to you every day, if that's what it takes. Lucas glanced at him, his eyes briefly meeting Carter's. For a second, there was something vulnerable in his gaze, something that resembled hope, or at least the possibility of it. But it faded quickly, replaced by the familiar walls Lucas had built around himself. "You don't get it, Mike," Lucas said, his voice cracking slightly. "The people who are supposed to take care of you, who are supposed to love you, they don't. They just leave. I don't even remember what it felt like to have a family, to feel safe, to feel loved." Carter could hear the pain in his voice, raw and desperate, and for a moment, the weight of it crushed him. He couldn't undo what had been done. He couldn't give Lucas back the years he had lost. But he could be here now. He could be the one who didn't leave. "I don't know what it's like, Lucas," Carter admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't imagine the things you've been through. But I do know this. I'm here now. I'm not going anywhere. And I'll stay as long as you need me." Lucas turned away, wiping his face with the sleeve of his jacket. Carter didn't move, didn't speak, just allowed the silence to fill the space between them. He didn't know what else to say. He didn't know how to erase the years of abandonment, or how to undo the damage that had already been done. But he wasn't leaving, not this time. After what felt like hours, Lucas stood up. "I can't promise you anything," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I guess we'll see." Carter stood as well, his legs stiff from sitting for so long. "I'm not asking for promises. I'm just asking for a chance." Lucas didn't say anything else. He just started walking down the steps, Carter following behind him. They didn't say much for the rest of the night, but for the first time, there was something different in the air. A shift, perhaps small, but it was there. Carter knew that the road ahead would be long and full of uncertainty, but this was the first step, and he would take it, one day at a time, proving himself to Lucas with every action, with every effort. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The days stretched into weeks, and Carter could feel the shift. It was subtle at first, the way Lucas would look at him just a little longer before turning away, the slight nods when Carter spoke, as if he were listening, as if he were considering what Carter had to say. It wasn't much, but for Carter, it was everything. The boy was starting to let him in bit by bit. But the street life, the endless struggle for survival, still held Lucas in its grip. Carter could see it in the way the boy moved, the wariness in his eyes, the readiness to flee at the smallest hint of danger. Lucas had grown up in a world where trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. And Carter knew that earning the trust would take time that neither of them had, if they were being honest with themselves. One evening, Carter showed up as usual, bringing a warm meal and the silent presence he had come to offer. As he approached the church steps, he saw Lucas sitting there, staring off into the distance. The boy's posture was different tonight, not the usual guarded stance, but something looser, more open. Carter hesitated for a moment, then walked over and sat down beside him. "Hey," Carter said softly, his voice calm but tented. "How's it going?" Lucas didn't immediately respond. He just continued to look ahead. But after a moment, he shifted his position and glanced at Carter, his eyes softer than usual. "I've been thinking," he said slowly, his voice heavy with something unspoken. Carter waited, not wanting to interrupt, allowing the silence to fill the space between them. "About what?" "I've been thinking about what you said," Lucas said, his gaze drifting again. "About being here, about trying." Carter's heart beat faster, his chest tight with anticipation. "What about it?" "I don't know if I can trust you, Mike," Lucas said, the words slow and heavy. "But I can't keep doing this alone. I can't keep hiding and running from everything." He paused, his eyes finally meeting Carter's. "I don't know if I'm ready, but maybe I'll try too." Carter swallowed, trying to find the right words, but nothing seemed enough. He had been waiting for this moment, this sliver of hope, and now that it was here, he wasn't sure if he was prepared for it. He wasn't prepared for the weight of Lucas's pain, or for the responsibility that came with it. "You don't have to be ready right now," Carter said quietly, his voice firm but gentle. "I'm not asking you to trust me yet, but I'm here, and I'll keep showing up, Lucas, for as long as it takes." Lucas didn't respond, but Carter could see the tiniest shift in his expression. The hardness that had once been etched into his features softened just a little. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't trust, but it was something. They sat together in silence for a while, the city's hum in the background. Carter didn't feel the need to fill the quiet with words. They didn't need words right now. All they had was time to rebuild, piece by piece. After a while, Lucas stood up and dusted himself off. "I'll be here tomorrow," he said, his voice quieter now, almost a promise. "Maybe we can talk more then." Carter stood too, his chest tight with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "I'll be here," he repeated, more to himself than to Lucas. As the boy walked away, disappearing into the night, Carter felt a shift deep inside him. It wasn't just a sense of relief, it was the beginning of something he didn't fully understand yet, but it was a start. And for the first time in years, Carter allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could earn back what he had lost. The nights grew colder as the weeks passed, and Carter's routine with Lucas became more predictable. Each evening, Carter would bring food, and they would sit together, sometimes in silence, sometimes speaking little, but always in each other's company. Carter knew that this was the fragile beginning of something that had to grow slowly. Trust couldn't be rushed, not after everything Lucas had endured, and certainly not after Carter's own actions had shattered the foundation they could have once built. Lucas was still cautious, his walls built high and thick, but Carter didn't mind. He didn't expect immediate changes. He just kept showing up every night without fail. Sometimes they would talk about the weather or what had happened during the day, but most of the time they would just sit in the quiet, sharing a space that felt more like healing than anything else. Slowly, Carter began to see something in Lucas that he hadn't before, the faintest flicker of vulnerability. One night, as Carter walked toward the church, he noticed that Lucas wasn't sitting on the steps like usual. His chest tightened, and a rush of worry flooded him. He walked faster, scanning the area. The church was quiet, the streets eerily empty for a Friday evening. "Lucas," Carter called out softly, his voice echoing in the hollow alleyway. There was no response. Panic started to creep in, and he walked further around the corner of the church, checking every shadow, every doorway. Then, finally, a soft sound came from behind the church, a faint, muffled noise. Carter's heart stopped for a moment as he turned, his hand instinctively reaching for his phone. He found Lucas sitting on the ground, his back against the brick wall, his knees pulled tightly to his chest. His head was down, and he was trembling, though the night wasn't especially cold. "Lucas," Carter asked again, his voice softer this time. He crouched down beside him, making sure to give him space. "Hey, you okay?" For a moment, there was no answer. Carter felt a wave of guilt. What had happened to the boy this time? Had he gotten too close to some danger he couldn't escape? But then, Lucas lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed, tears streaking down his face. He wasn't sobbing, but the pain was there, raw and unhidden. I don't know what to do anymore, Mike," Lucas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know how to keep going. It feels like I've been running my whole life, running from everything, from people who left me, from people who hurt me. And I don't know how to stop." Carter's heart broke at the sound of Lucas's voice, thick with the weight of years spent battling the world alone. There were no words for this, no simple way to fix it. But Carter knew one thing for sure. He wasn't going anywhere. He wasn't leaving. "Hey, listen to me," Carter said, his voice firm yet gentle. "You don't have to run anymore. Not with me. I'm not going anywhere. And I know it's hard, Lucas. I know. But you don't have to face this alone anymore." Lucas looked at him for a long moment, searching his face as though trying to find any sign that Carter wasn't just another person who would eventually walk away. For a second, it felt like everything hung in the balance, like that moment might be the turning point they both needed. "I don't trust anyone, Mike," Lucas said, his voice almost pleading. "I've been hurt so many times. I don't know if I can trust you." Carter nodded, his eyes soft. "I get that. I do. I don't expect you to trust me just because I say so. I'm here, and I'll keep showing up. But it's up to you when you're ready." Lucas wiped his face with the back of his hand, still unsure of everything. But Carter remained there, patiently waiting for him to make that choice. Slowly, Lucas leaned against the wall, exhaustion taking over his body as the weight of his past seemed too heavy to hold up any longer. "I just don't know how to do it," Lucas muttered, barely audible. "Do what?" Carter asked, confused. trust anyone, love anyone. Lucas's voice cracked, the words hanging in the air like a confession. Carter sighed, his heart aching for the boy sitting beside him, the child who had never known what it meant to be cared for. He placed a hand on Lucas's shoulder, not pushing, just offering a steady, grounding presence. "You don't have to figure it all out right now," Carter said. "It's okay to not have all the answers. I'm here, and I'll be here when you're ready to try, when you're ready to trust again." One step at a time. Lucas didn't answer, but for the first time, Carter saw something shift in him, a crack in the walls, a tiny flicker of something he hadn't seen before. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't trust, but it was a step, and Carter knew that would have to be enough for now. The following weeks were a mix of small victories and quiet setbacks. Carter continued to meet Lucas by the church every night, the boy now slightly less distant, though still guarded. There were nights when Lucas would speak, sharing bits of his past, his struggles, the betrayals, and the loneliness that had shaped him into the young man Carter saw now. Other nights, he would say nothing, simply sitting in silence beside Carter, as though their shared presence was enough. Carter didn't rush. He knew better now than to force the boy to open up or let down his walls too quickly. He had learned patience the hard way, and now it was his most valuable ally. One evening, after they had finished their meal in quiet solitude, Lucas looked up at the sky, a faint hint of emotion flickering across his face. The day had been long and difficult, and the nights always felt colder when spent alone. Carter could feel the weight of Lucas's words hanging in the air, though neither of them had said much all night. "You ever wonder if it's too late to start over?" Lucas asked suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid of the answer. Carter's heart clenched at the question, and he slowly turned to look at the boy. It was a question Carter himself had asked countless times over the years, but hearing it from Lucas, with the rawness and vulnerability of a life shattered, made the question heavier. "Every day," Carter admitted, his voice thick with emotion. "I think about it all the time, but I've learned that it's never too late. Not as long as you're still breathing. Not as long as you're still willing to fight for something better." Lucas was silent, his gaze distant as he processed Carter's words. The flickering streetlight above them illuminated his face, casting shadows that made him appear even more fragile than he really was. The boy was only just beginning to understand the truth Carter was offering, that he could choose a different path, that he didn't have to live his life as a victim of circumstance. But it was a hard truth to accept. It was one thing to hear it, and another to believe it enough to take the first step toward it. "Sometimes it feels like no matter what I do, I can't escape it," Lucas said, his voice breaking. "The past, it's always there, following me, and I don't know how to outrun it." Carter felt his throat tighten, his heart aching for the boy. He had spent years running from his own mistakes, hiding behind the badge, pretending he wasn't the man responsible for the wreckage in his life. Now, as he sat beside Lucas, he realized that maybe they were both running from something only Lucas had run longer, with no one to offer him a way out. "You don't have to outrun it, Lucas," Carter said softly. "You don't have to run from your past anymore. What you need to do is face it, step by step. That's what I'm here for. We'll do it together." Lucas didn't look at him. Instead, he stared at the ground, his fingers tracing the cracks in the concrete beneath them. He looked so young, so lost. But Carter knew there was more strength in him than the boy realized. The same strength that Carter had once buried deep inside himself. "I'm not ready," Lucas said after a long pause, his voice quiet but steady. "I'm not ready to face all that. I can't." And Carter understood. He understood the fear, the doubt, the overwhelming weight of a past that seemed impossible to move on from. But what Carter had learned, and what he wanted Lucas to understand, was that facing it wasn't about being ready, it was about taking the first step, no matter how small. "You don't have to do it all at once," Carter said gently. "You don't have to have all the answers, but you can start, and I'll be here, no matter what." For a moment, there was no response. The streetlights buzzed softly, and the distant sounds of the city echoed in the background. Lucas shifted slightly, the air between them heavy with unspoken words. "I don't know if I can trust you yet," Lucas said, his voice shaky but resolute. "But I'm trying. I'll try." Just don't leave me again." Carter felt a lump rise in his throat at the simple request. He could feel the weight of it. Lucas was asking for something Carter had no right to expect, something he had failed to offer for so many years. And yet, here it was, a chance to do better, a chance to make things right. "I won't leave," Carter said, his voice firm with the promise. "I'm not going anywhere, Lucas." For the first time in what felt like forever, Lucas looked at him, really looked at him. There was still fear in his eyes, but there was something else there too, hope. It was a flicker, small but undeniable. And for Carter, it was the first light of a future that had once seemed impossible. The road ahead would still be long, and the weight of their shared past would not be easily shaken. But they were taking those first steps together. And for the first time, Carter believed in the possibility of redemption both for himself and for the son he had abandoned. The days continued to slip by, the moments between Carter and Lucas becoming less strained and more natural. It was still early, still fragile, but the tension that had once filled their encounters was beginning to dissipate. They had their routines, Carter bringing food, Lucas sitting in silence for a while before speaking. Sometimes they would walk through the city together, and Lucas would show Carter places he lived, places that had shaped him. The city, once an enemy to them both, was becoming a landscape they could navigate together. But the shadows of the past weren't done haunting them yet. One evening, as they walked through an unfamiliar street near the edge of the city, Carter noticed Lucas's posture stiffen. The boy's face tightened, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area. Carter instinctively took a step closer to him, his hand almost reaching for his gun, though he didn't want to scare Lucas. He wasn't sure what was happening, but the boy was clearly on edge. "What's going on?" Carter asked, his voice low. "I don't like this street," Lucas said, his voice tight. "I don't like being here." Carter followed his gaze, noticing the dark alleyways, the worn-down buildings. It was a part of the city Carter didn't patrol often. It was filled with an energy Carter had seen before, dangerous, unpredictable. "I used to stay here," Lucas muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I thought I could keep myself safe, but it never worked. Too many bad people. Too many times I thought I could escape." His voice trailed off, and Carter could see the remnants of old fears, old memories, rising to the surface. He didn't need to ask what Lucas meant. He had seen enough of the boy's pain to know that the streets had taken much more from him than they had from Carter. "Let's keep moving," Carter said softly, taking a slow step forward. "You're safe now. No one's going to hurt you." But Lucas didn't move. Instead, he turned to face Carter, his eyes full of something darker, something that had been buried deep within him. "I'm not safe anywhere, Mike," Lucas said, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and anger. "I thought I could outrun it, but you can't outrun people like them. You can't outrun the ones who've hurt you." Carter's chest tightened as he watched the boy, his heart aching for everything Lucas had been through. He had no idea what it was like, no idea what the boy had been forced to endure. All he could do was stand there, trying to offer comfort, but he knew that wasn't enough. "I'm sorry," Carter said, his voice quiet but filled with sincerity. "I can't change what happened to you, but I'm here now. I won't let anything happen to you again, not while I'm around." Lucas's expression softened, though the fear still clung to him like a shadow he couldn't escape. After a long moment, he finally nodded, though his eyes were still distant, lost in memories that had yet to fade. "I don't know how to let it go," Lucas whispered. "You don't have to," Carter replied. "Not all at once. It's okay to take it slow. It's okay to not be okay." They stood there for a while, the weight of their shared silence heavier than anything they could say. Carter knew that the path to healing wasn't linear. There were no easy fixes, no quick answers. It was going to be hard, and there would be setbacks. But Lucas was still here, and that meant there was hope. After a while, they began to walk again, side by side, the night air cold against their skin. Lucas didn't speak much after that, but Carter could see something in his posture, a subtle change, a softening that hadn't been there before. As they walked back toward the church, Carter felt a quiet sense of pride. They were moving forward together. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for the first time, Carter believed that no matter how dark the past had been, they could face whatever came next together. The church steps had become a strange kind of sanctuary. For Carter, it was a place of quiet redemption. For Lucas, it was a pause, a space where he didn't have to survive, just exist. But peace was never permanent, not in a world shaped by scars. It came in fragments, in borrowed moments, and just as quickly as it arrived, it could be shaken. That night, a storm rolled over the city. The rain was cold, heavy, relentless. Carter stood under the thin awning of the church, soaked through, waiting. He hadn't seen Lucas all day, and the absence gnawed. The boy had started showing up, like clockwork, silent, cautious, but present. His absence tonight wasn't just noticed, it was felt. Then, through the downpour, a silhouette appeared. Lucas stumbled into the glow of the street lamp, drenched and shaking. His lip was split. His eye was beginning to swell. Carter rushed forward, his heart dropping. "What happened?" he asked, reaching out, but Lucas flinched, pulling back. "Don't," the boy muttered, voice hoarse. "I'm fine." "You're not fine," Carter said, his voice tighter now. "Who did this to you?" Lucas didn't answer. He dropped down on the steps, head hanging low, rainwater dripping from his clothes. He looked like a ghost of himself, thinner, more fragile than Carter had ever seen him. His fists were clenched, his breathing uneven. "I shouldn't have gone back," he said after a long silence. "Back where?" Lucas looked up at him, and this time there was no wall, no shield, just exhaustion and pain. "The shelter, the one by the canal. I stayed there last winter. It's where I learned not to trust anyone. Someone saw me, someone who remembered me." Carter sat beside him, the storm forgotten. "Did they hurt you?" Lucas nodded once. "Tried to take what I had. Got mad when I fought back." Rage boiled inside Carter, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he forced his voice to stay calm. "You don't have to go back there. Ever." Lucas let out a bitter laugh. "You think I want to? I was just looking for somewhere dry." Carter stared out into the rain, feeling the helplessness settle in again. The streets were brutal. There was no room for softness, no shelter for someone like Lucas, who had spent too long navigating the cracks of a system that had never truly seen him. "You're not alone anymore," Carter said quietly. "You don't have to sleep in alleys or hide from people who hurt you. We'll find somewhere else, somewhere safe." Lucas looked at him for a long time, unreadable. Then he shook his head slowly. "You keep saying we. Like this is real. Like we're actually something." "We are," Carter said without hesitation. Lucas blinked, taken aback. "You think because you show up with food and sit here that makes us a family?" "No," Carter admitted, "but I think showing up night after night, even when you don't want me to, I think that means something. And I think you know it too." Lucas turned away, but he didn't argue. That silence was a small victory. "Let me take you somewhere," Carter said. "Just for the night. Warm bed, a roof, nothing fancy. No pressure." Lucas hesitated. His eyes scanned the empty street, the dark shadows, the neon reflections of the city pulsing in puddles. Then he nodded, just once. Carter helped him up carefully, mindful of his bruises. The boy was still stiff with resistance, but he didn't pull away this time. They walked in silence to Carter's car, the rain still coming down in sheets. As they drove through the city, Carter glanced at him from time to time. Lucas stared out the window, arms crossed, but he didn't look like he was preparing to run. Not tonight. When they reached Carter's apartment, Lucas hesitated at the door, eyeing it like a trap. Carter unlocked it and stepped aside. "No strings," he said. "If you want to leave, I won't stop you, but it's dry. It's safe." Lucas stepped in slowly, every movement careful. The space was small, modest furniture, a few old photos, a couch that had seen better days, but it was warm, quiet. Carter handed him a towel, then pointed to the bathroom. "There's a clean shirt on the counter. You can take a shower. I'll be out here." Lucas stood still for a moment, towel in hand. Then, without a word, he disappeared down the hall. Carter exhaled, rubbing his face. The apartment felt different, with someone else in it. Alive, unfamiliar. Minutes later, the sound of running water echoed through the space. And for the first time in years, Carter felt the faint pulse of something he thought he'd lost: hope. The morning light filtered through the blinds, casting soft shadows across the room. Carter sat at the small kitchen table, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly, his thoughts still on the night before. He hadn't expected things to move so quickly, but Lucas's decision to stay the night, however small, it seemed felt like a significant shift. It wasn't just about offering the boy a roof over his head. It was about proving to him, day by day, that trust could be rebuilt. Lucas was still asleep, wrapped in the blanket Carter had given him, his frame smaller than it should have been. Carter's eyes lingered on the boy, noting the bruises still visible on his face. The life Lucas had lived was evident in every scar, every flinch. Carter felt helpless at times, knowing that some wounds couldn't be healed with food, shelter, or even words. But he couldn't abandon him again. He heard the bathroom door creak open, and a moment later, Lucas walked into the kitchen, his hair damp from the shower, his expression guarded but softening. The boy still wore the old clothes he'd arrived in, but at least he seemed clean now. His eyes avoided Carter's as usual, but there was a flicker of something, a hint of gratitude, or was it just a momentary lapse in his usual defenses? "You want some coffee?" Carter asked, trying to break the awkward silence. Lucas didn't respond immediately, his eyes scanning the room. Carter could see the hesitation, the discomfort of being in an unfamiliar space. Carter could relate. He had never truly made a home for himself, always running, always pushing people away. Finally, Lucas nodded. "Yeah, just black." Carter poured the coffee, setting it in front of him. Lucas took the cup, but didn't sit down, instead choosing to stand by the window, his back to Carter, as he stared out at the rainy street. The tension in the room was palpable. "I'm not going to ask you to stay here," Carter said after a moment, his voice steady but soft. "I'm not trying to force anything. But if you need a place to go, even for a little while, you don't have to go back out there." Lucas didn't respond, but Carter saw the slight tremor in his shoulders. The boy wasn't just resisting the offer, he was resisting something deeper, something Carter couldn't reach yet. "You can't keep running, Lucas," Carter said, his voice gentler now. "You don't have to do it alone." The boy's hands clenched around the coffee mug, his knuckles white, and Carter could see the conflict inside him, the fight between wanting to trust and the overwhelming fear of being hurt again. Carter knew that this wasn't something that could be fixed overnight, and yet the temptation to push, to make Lucas accept his help, burned inside him. "I'm not asking you to trust me right away," Carter continued. "I get it. You've been let down too many times. But I'm here now, and I'm not going anywhere." Lucas turned around, his eyes meeting Carter's for the first time that morning. There was still a wall between them, but it wasn't as high as it had been. It was a crack, a tiny, fragile crack, but it was there. "You don't know what it's like," Lucas said, his voice quieter now, but the pain was clear. "To be alone all the time, to always have to watch your back, to never know if you'll wake up and be safe." Carter nodded slowly, knowing that Lucas's words were true. "I don't know what it's like to live the way you've lived, but I know what it's like to be alone. I've been there too. I've lived with my mistakes. But the thing is, Lucas, we don't have to stay alone. We don't have to carry the weight of the world on our own." Lucas's gaze dropped to the floor, and for a brief moment, Carter thought he might say something, might open up in a way that he hadn't before. But Lucas just shook his head, a quiet, almost imperceptible motion, and sipped from the coffee cup. "You think this is easy," Lucas muttered, his voice breaking slightly. "You think you can just swoop in and make everything better? You can't fix me." "I'm not trying to fix you," Carter replied, his voice firm but calm. "I'm just trying to be here. You don't need fixing, Lucas. You just need someone who cares. That's all I'm offering." The silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Carter watched Lucas, waiting for any sign that he was getting through, that the boy was starting to let down even a fraction of his guard. It was a long shot, but it was all he had. "I'm not promising anything," Lucas said quietly after a moment, setting the coffee mug down. "But I'll stay for a while." Carter felt the smallest flicker of relief, a tiny spark of hope that maybe, just maybe, they were on the right path. "That's all I'm asking for." They didn't speak much after that, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was a quiet understanding of fragile trust that had begun to form between them, one step at a time. As Lucas settled into the couch later that night, Carter found himself watching the boy for a moment longer than usual. He knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be more setbacks, more walls to break down, more painful conversations. But for the first time, he felt something he hadn't felt in years, the possibility of healing. And, for Lucas, the first tiny steps toward a new beginning. The following days felt different, but not in the way Carter had expected. He had assumed that, after offering Lucas a safe place to stay, things would begin to settle, that the boy would gradually start to open up, start to trust him more. But the truth was far more complicated than that. Lucas had started to engage more, if only in small ways. He would sit at the kitchen table with Carter in the mornings, both of them eating breakfast in silence, though there was less tension now. Lucas was no longer as distant, but he still hadn't let his guard down completely. The nights were the hardest, though when they were alone, without the distractions of the day. Carter would lie in bed, listening to the silence that stretched between them. The walls in Lucas's mind were still high and thick, and every time Carter thought he was getting closer, Lucas would retreat into himself again. Tonight was no different. Carter sat on the couch, watching the flickering light from the television. Lucas sat beside him, his knees pulled to his chest, staring blankly at the screen, though it was clear his mind was elsewhere. "Do you ever think about what you want to do?" Carter asked, his voice quiet, trying to break the tension. Lucas didn't immediately respond. He shifted slightly, his jaw clenched. Carter knew the question was a heavy one. He wasn't asking about grand plans or dreams, just a simple question about the future. What did Lucas want out of all this? What did he hope for, deep down, now that he was here safe, if only for a moment? "I don't know," Lucas said finally, his voice tight. "I used to have dreams. A long time ago. I don't remember what they were, but I had them. And then, it was just about surviving. Just getting through the day." Carter nodded, understanding more than Lucas probably realized. Survival had been Carter's life for so long, burying his regrets, burying his pain, and just focusing on getting by. It wasn't until recently that he realized how much of himself he had been ignoring, how much of his soul had been worn thin. "I think we all have dreams," Carter said softly. "Sometimes they get lost along the way, but it's never too late to find them again. Not if you're willing to look." Lucas didn't reply. His eyes were still locked on the screen, though Carter could tell he wasn't really watching. His thoughts seemed to be racing, battling with the reality of his situation. "I don't know how to trust anyone anymore," Lucas muttered, almost to himself. "You say you're here for me, but I can't shake the feeling that you're just like everyone else. You'll leave eventually. Everyone does." The words hit Carter hard, harder than he expected. It was true. Lucas had been abandoned so many times that he couldn't fathom the possibility of something real. Carter's mind flashed to the boy's brokenness, the bruises, the scars, the walls built around him, and he felt the familiar guilt wash over him. He had hurt Lucas, and no amount of trying could erase that. "I'm not going anywhere," Carter said firmly, his voice steady. "I'm not like the others. I won't leave you. You don't have to believe me right now, but you will, over time. I'm not asking for anything in return. Just don't push me away." "Not yet." Lucas's face softened for a moment, and Carter thought, maybe for the first time, he saw a small glimmer of hope in the boy's eyes. But it quickly faded, replaced by the familiar skepticism. "I don't know if I can believe that," Lucas said quietly, his voice breaking. "You don't have to believe it right now," Carter replied. "But I'm here, Lucas. I'm not going anywhere. We'll take this one step at a time, together." Lucas didn't respond. He just sat there, his posture stiff, his gaze still locked on the screen. But Carter could feel the shift, just the slightest shift, in the air between them. The silence grew, stretching out between them like an unspoken promise. Carter didn't know how long it would take for Lucas to trust him, if he ever would. But he couldn't walk away, not this time. As the night wore on, Lucas finally leaned back against the couch, his shoulders sagging slightly. Carter noticed the tension in his frame had eased just a little. "You can't fix me, Mike," Lucas said quietly. "I'm not trying to," Carter replied. "I'm just trying to be here. To be the one thing that doesn't leave." Lucas didn't say anything else, but as the hours ticked by, Carter felt a sense of quiet hope begin to settle in. It wasn't much, but it was something. The morning sun poured through the window, casting a golden warmth across the small apartment. It was the first time in weeks that the light didn't feel harsh or intrusive. For Carter, It felt earned. Lucas was still asleep, curled up on the couch, breathing evenly. His features, often tight with anxiety or hidden behind walls of silence, looked softer in sleep, younger. For a moment, Carter let himself hope, really hope, not just for redemption, but for a future where this boy, his son, could finally live without fear. He sat at the table, flipping through a worn notepad, making lists, jobs, support programs, shelter referrals, counseling centers. He didn't want to force anything on Lucas, but he needed to be ready for the moment the boy might finally say, "What's next?" Around mid-morning, Lucas stirred. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, then blinked into the sunlight like it was a foreign thing. "You hungry?" Carter asked, not looking up. Lucas shrugged, then nodded. "Yeah, progress." As Carter plated 2 simple breakfasts, eggs and toast, Lucas sat at the table without needing to be asked. They ate quietly at first, but silence wasn't as suffocating as it used to be. It was peaceful now, familiar. Halfway through the meal, Lucas spoke without lifting his eyes. "I've been thinking." Carter looked up, giving him space to speak. "I want to try, not just surviving. I want to try living." The words landed like a punch to the heart. Carter's throat tightened, but he kept his composure. "You don't have to have it all figured out," he said gently. "We'll take it step by step." Lucas finally looked up. "Do you think I could be something? Like, actually be someone?" Carter leaned forward, his voice firm but tender. "I know you can." A long silence passed. Then Lucas gave a small, uncertain smile. The first real smile Carter had ever seen from him. And for a moment, time seemed to stop. Later that day, they walked together, not through the alleyways, not through old wounds, but through new streets, unfamiliar and full of possibility. Carter watched Lucas beside him, not behind, not apart, but beside. The city was still loud, still full of chaos, but it didn't feel quite so big anymore. Not when they walked together. Lucas looked over. "You ever think maybe the worst part of your life could lead to the best?" Carter smiled. "I do now." And they kept walking, not toward a destination, but into something more powerful than either had known for years. A beginning. Hope you enjoyed the story. Comment where you're watching from, leave a like, and subscribe to the channel.